I hadn't even taken off my blazer when I saw it. My apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of my phone, still buried in the side pocket of my carry-on. 48 hours, 4 countries, a $3 billion deal, and not even time to take a breath. I turned on the lamp near the doorway. The bulb flickered once, then stabilized. I hadn't been home in over a week. The air smelled stale. There were still 2 unopened Amazon packages by the door. I kicked off my heels, took a deep breath, and opened my laptop, mostly out of habit. That's when I saw it. Subject line: Your employment status at Daxon Aerodyne timestamp, 3:02 p.m. Sent while I was still midair, somewhere between Frankfurt and JFK. The email was short, cold, sanitized, like it had been written by legal, not by a person. Eliza, effective immediately. Your employment at Daxon Aerodyne is terminated. Details regarding final compensation and exit logistics will follow. No thank you, no explanation, no acknowledgement that I had just flown across 4 continents to close the most complex contract in company history. Just like that, I was gone. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the lid. I stared at the wall for a full minute before realizing I was still standing by the door. Suitcase handle gripped tight like I was about to run back out. My brain couldn't process it. I hadn't even unpacked. I hadn't even slept. I collapsed onto the couch, still wearing the same navy blue blazer I'd worn through customs. I tried to log into my Daxon health portal to refill a migraine prescription. Locked out. I tried to call the benefits hotline. Disconnected. The company had pulled everything, even my health insurance. Within 2 hours of sending that email, they'd erased me completely. I blinked at the ceiling, the edges of my vision blurring slightly. Jet lag? Maybe. Or maybe this was the sensation of being unmade. The last time I'd felt this dizzy. I was 22, walking out of a car crash with airbag burns on my arms. This felt worse, because this time, they'd done it on purpose, and for now, I didn't even know why. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, with that email echoing in my mind like a gunshot in an empty hallway. Effective immediately. 2 words that shredded nearly a decade of my life like it meant nothing, as if I had never been there, as if the boardrooms, the red eyes, the missed birthdays, the 3:00 a.m. calls with Tokyo, all of it could just be deleted with one sterile email. I let my head fall back against the couch cushion and closed my eyes. The exhaustion was so deep it almost felt like sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying it all. The climb, the sacrifices, the milestones. 8 years. 8 years. I started at Daxon as a contract legal analyst. Temporary, disposable, no benefits, no parking spot, no voice in any room that mattered. I sat in a shared cubicle next to the server room, buried under non-disclosure forms and cross-border tax code revisions. But I learned. Fast. I stayed late. I read the fine print when everyone else skimmed, and when an obscure joint venture deal with Singapore nearly derailed because someone had misquoted Section 43B of their export law. I corrected it, quietly, without fanfare. 2 weeks later, I was hired full-time. That was year 1. By year 3, I was leading the International Compliance Task Force. I didn't ask for promotions. They just happened when executives realized the entire deal flow stalled every time I took a day off. I wasn't flashy. I didn't schmooze. I didn't flirt or flatter or fake. I just showed up and did the work no one else knew how to do. I kept our contracts watertight. I negotiated side clauses no one remembered to read. I translated legalese into language that didn't get us sued. I built the systems that carried this company across borders, and I did it without ever asking for credit. But I remember the day I earned their respect. It was year 6. Daxon was facing a $280 million penalty from the EU for a supposed breach in data transfer agreements. Our legal team was scrambling. The CFO was ready to settle. I sat quietly at the end of the conference table, flipping through the 27th page of the compliance brief, when something felt off. I read it again, then again, and I found it. One word, one clause, misinterpreted. The breach wasn't on our end, it was on the vendor. Their data handoff timestamp violated the chain of custody, not ours. I laid it out, step by step, cited precedent. Within 72 hours. The EU dropped the claim entirely. There was no parade, no bonus. Just a rare nod from the CEO at the time, and a new title, Head of Global Contracts. I had become the firewall between Daxon and billion-dollar disasters, and I wore that responsibility with quiet pride. Until now. Until 3:02 p.m., when Vernon Blake deleted it all with a click. He hadn't just fired me. He had wiped me clean, as if I'd never mattered. As if the foundation I spent 8 years building wasn't mine to begin with. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Theft of effort, of identity, of history. And as I sat there in my apartment, the sun beginning to sink beyond the skyline, a thought started to rise inside me. Quiet at first, but sharp. You don't get to erase me that easily. The moment that email hit my inbox, something inside me snapped, and something else quietly clicked into place. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Maybe I'd misread the message. Maybe there was a follow-up email explaining everything, a mistake, a glitch. But as the hours crawled by and my Daxon credentials remained locked, a new thought crept in. This wasn't an accident. And when I let myself sit with that possibility, I started to see all the pieces I had ignored. Vernon Blake had always known how to smile. He had that slick kind of charisma executives in glass towers seem to be born with. Tall, unbothered, custom suits, press-friendly charm. People called him visionary. Shareholders loved his quarterly call optimism. His LinkedIn bio read like a tech world gospel. But I knew another version of Vernon. One you didn't see in magazines. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He buried you under silence. Or worse, visibility. He'd smile as he passed you the microphone in meetings you weren't prepped for, then nod politely as you struggled. He'd praise your work in emails, then casually omit your name in press releases. He made you doubt yourself just enough that when he cut you out, you wondered if maybe you deserved it. Looking back now, I realize he had started laying the groundwork weeks before the global tour. The first sign? He stopped looping me into pre-contract strategy calls. I remember thinking maybe the workload had been delegated. Then came the second. He insisted I lead the global trip alone, citing cost efficiency and empowerment. He wouldn't join, even for the final leg in Tokyo, a first, considering the magnitude of the deal. At the time, I rationalized it. I told myself, he trusts you, he wants you to shine. But now, in the chilling clarity of hindsight, it felt like something else. Abandonment disguised as empowerment. And then there was the press email. I hadn't meant to see it. 2 days before the trip, I stopped by the 28th floor conference room to drop off a revised clause package. Vernon had just stepped out, and his laptop was still open. Screen lit. Email window active. I glanced without meaning to. My eyes caught a subject line that made my stomach knot. Q4 branding push. Spotlight suggestions. And just below that, a message from Vernon to the PR team. Make sure the final story frames this as a leadership victory. Global expansion championed by C-suite vision, or something like that. This is the keystone of our Q4 campaign. It needs to be my moment. My moment? I remember blinking. I stood there, folder in hand, heart beating strangely slow. It wasn't just that he was claiming credit. It was that he was preemptively erasing me, before I'd even boarded the first flight. I walked out of the room, Didn't say anything. I buried the feeling deep, the way women in corporate America are trained to do. We don't cry, we carry. We swallow the small betrayals so they don't derail the mission. But this wasn't small. He knew I would close the deal, and he'd built an entire PR campaign around that assumption, without me. The pieces fit too perfectly now, pulling me from strategy calls, keeping me off the press schedule, isolating me just enough to ensure that once the ink dried, the applause would fall solely on him. It wasn't a mistake, it was choreography. And I had danced it all the way to the edge. I closed my laptop and sat back, the sting of betrayal still fresh, but the fog in my mind beginning to clear. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. Not anymore. What replaced the hurt was something colder, still, focused. Vernon thought it was over. He thought that by cutting me out, the deal would move forward without a hitch, that I was just the courier, not the architect. He'd made a critical mistake. He forgot who built the system. I stood, still in the same wrinkled navy blazer, and walked to the bookshelf near the window. Behind an old binder labeled Singapore Escrow 19, I kept a secure copy of every major contract I'd ever touched. Daxon discouraged this kind of offline archive, but years of legal training had taught me. Trust policy last. Paper first. I slid out the thick blue folder titled Global Defense Suite, 4-nation version. The first page carried 4 flags: Germany, Japan, UAE, Brazil, plus 1 signature, mine. I sat down at the kitchen table, flipped to page 16, and ran my finger along the clause I knew by heart. Activation of full-scale system deployment shall require in-person verification and biometric authorization of Daxon's designated technical representative, as named in Section 3.1, in each contracting jurisdiction. That name in Section 3.1. Mine. Not a title, not a department. A specific, credentialed individual, Eliza J. Grant. I remember when I insisted on that wording. The external legal teams had pushed back, arguing it wasn't necessary. Even our own lawyers had rolled their eyes. No one's going to care about a biometric clause in the activation section, one had muttered. I did, and I made sure it stayed in, because what they didn't know, what Vernon certainly didn't bother to check, was that in each of those countries, especially Germany and Japan, activation isn't symbolic, it's legal. A contract can be signed, even funded, but without biometric verification, it remains non-executable. In other words, the contract was dormant. Nothing had launched. No satellite codes had been released. No infrastructure had begun. Daxon had a $3 billion agreement, sitting in limbo, and I held the key. I kept reading, page after page, the corners dog-eared from months of revisions. Each jurisdiction had its own variation of the clause, but all with the same core condition. I must be present. Not a replacement, not a digital signature. Me. That kind of clause was rare, risky, even. But I knew why I'd done it. Because governments trusted me, not the executives who cycled through every 2 years. I was the legal constant. The face in every diplomatic meeting. The one who answered questions without spinning. It was my reputation they were buying, not Vernon's. And now, without me, the system couldn't breathe. I pulled out my phone and opened the government communications portal. One unread message from the Ministry of Defense. Japan. Another from a private diplomat in the UAE. Both asking for verification status. Both waiting. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened my Notes app and started a new list titled Power Levers. Under it, I typed 4-country biometric clause, activation delays, SAR, breach triggers. Alteris still wants regional entry, PR fallout risk, media timeline. Vernon's leadership victory pitch could flip to liability. I paused, smiled faintly. This wasn't panic. This wasn't revenge. This was calculus. I was still invisible to them. Vernon likely hadn't even realized the deal wasn't live yet. He was too busy preparing interviews, press releases, planning his image campaign. He didn't know the spotlight he craved was built on a stage I hadn't turned on. It was barely 7:15 a.m. when my phone rang. Not the work line, Daxon had already killed that. This was my personal number, the one only a handful of people ever used. I recognized the country code before the name lit up. Plauen 49, Germany. I let it ring once more before answering. My voice was calm, despite the tightness in my chest. Hello? A pause. Then the voice came through, clear, clipped, and unmistakably official. Ms. Grant, this is Eric Mueller, liaison for the German Federal Ministry of Defense. Do you have a moment to speak? I stood up, automatically walking toward the window, the way I always did during serious calls. Yes, of course. We're reviewing your portion of the activation protocol for the defense grid contract. It's been 3 days, and our legal and technical offices haven't received your biometric confirmation. There's concern from Berlin that deployment is being delayed due to non-compliance from Daxon's end. Can you confirm your availability to proceed? He didn't sound suspicious. Not yet. Just confused, curious, professional. I took a breath, carefully choosing my tone. Not robotic, not defensive, just steady. I understand the concern. My current position is in flux. I've been told Daxon is reviewing some of the deployment timelines. I'm waiting on updated direction from their legal coordination team. It was true, in the most technical sense. Daxon hadn't given me direction because they'd erased me. But I wasn't about to admit that to someone who could unravel a $3 billion contract with a single recommendation. I see, Eric said after a pause. So to confirm, you have not yet declined your role as the designated representative? No, I have not, I said evenly. There was another pause. I imagined him scanning a checklist on the other end. Protocols, roles, risks. Then his voice dropped slightly, less formal now. Ms. Grant, off the record, is there something we should know? Any change in structure, authority, or legality that might explain the holdup? I hesitated, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wasn't sure how much of the truth I was willing to show just yet. So I offered something neutral. I believe there have been some internal shifts. I'm still trying to understand the implications myself. Silence. Then, quietly, Eric said something I hadn't expected. If we detect any material misrepresentation from Daxon, particularly concerning delegation or activation authority, the ministry is authorized to reopen vendor consideration. That includes firms like Altaris. I froze, just for a second. He had said it delicately, carefully. But the message was clear. They trusted me more than they trusted Daxon. And they were watching. I didn't react. I couldn't afford to. I'll reach out to Daxon Legal today, I replied simply. And I'll follow up with you directly once I receive clarity. Appreciated, he said. For what it's worth, Ms. Grant, you've always been one of the few people we could count on to translate these kinds of deals into something real. The call ended a few seconds later, but the weight of his words lingered far longer than the dial tone. I stood there for a moment, staring out over the skyline, the city still half asleep beneath the rising light, somewhere between the silence and the tension. I felt it, recognition, not in the form of headlines, not a bonus check, not applause from a boardroom filled with men who once called me overprepared. Just quiet trust, from someone who mattered, someone who saw the difference between a corporate pawn and a structural cornerstone. In the global defense space, everything runs on confidence, not in promises, but in people. And Eric Mueller had just reminded me that my name still meant something in rooms Vernon Blake could only smile his way into. I walked back to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and typed a short note into my journal app. Germany will move if I move first. They're watching, waiting. I control the timeline now. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was leverage, stacking itself, day by day, while Vernon paraded around with fake certainty. And I wasn't done building. I hadn't seen Liam Cortez in 4 years, but the moment he stepped into the cafe, it was like no time had passed. He still wore those dark Italian shoes that never seemed to scuff. His shirt sleeves casually rolled just above the wrist. And that same unreadable expression, half strategist, half gambler. If Vernon Blake was the showman executive, Liam was the man who wrote the show before anyone knew there was a stage. I chose the cafe intentionally. Quiet. Anonymous. Off the main drag in Soho. No logos. No chance of being spotted by a Daxon affiliate still looping me into their email threads out of habit. We weren't friends, but we'd always had a mutual understanding. Two people who saw the bones behind the building, not just the glass. He approached with a familiar smirk. "Ms. Grant," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I figured I'd see you again. Didn't think it'd be this soon, or this interesting." I didn't waste time. "This isn't a job interview." He leaned back slightly, amused. "I didn't think it was." "I'm not here to jump ship," I continued. "The ship sank. I'm here to build something better, before the vultures turn the wreckage into marketing copy." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Go on." I opened my folder. Not the official documents, just 5 pages. Bullet points, timelines, legal structures, systems architecture, a sketch of a revised framework built from what I knew Daxon had fumbled. Not stolen data, just deep insight, expertly woven. He glanced through it quickly, his eyes scanning the way only someone fluent in high-stakes policy could. "What's your angle?" he asked. "I don't want to work under anyone," I said. "Not this time. I build the system. I lead the rollout. I represent it. Legally and publicly. My name is on the architecture, and my terms shape the contracts." "And what do we get?" I smiled, leaning in slightly. "You get 4 clean entries into 4 extremely locked markets. Japan, Germany, UAE, Brazil. All governments already trust me. Some are already waiting for my call. You won't be starting cold. You'll be starting with leverage Daxon has already burned." Liam stared at me for a moment, calculating, not doubting. "You always did think 3 moves ahead. And you always knew which players to bet on." He tapped the corner of the folder. "You know, 4 years ago, I made you an offer." "I remember," I said. I wasn't ready. I still believed in building from within. And now? Now I believe in building without permission. That seemed to land. His posture shifted. He pulled out his own tablet, unlocked it, and brought up a presentation deck labeled Q4 Expansion Targets. Without saying a word, he turned it toward me. 4 flags: Japan, Germany, UAE, Brazil. I looked at him sharply. "You're going after them," I said. "We've been circling for months," he replied. "But Daxon has always had first positioning. Your name was the reason 3 of those doors stayed closed to us. And now that Daxon's fumbled?" He gave me a slow nod. "We're preparing to move fast, with or without you. But with you," he tapped the folder again, "this whole thing gets cleaner, quicker, and poetic." The word stuck with me. Poetic. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a rewrite. A moment passed. Then I extended my hand across the table. He took it. No dramatics, no press photos, no applause. Just a handshake built on 4 years of quiet respect and a shared understanding that timing, in our world, is everything. We didn't sign anything that day. That would come later. What we did was more important. We acknowledged the shift, the silent current that was already pulling Daxon down and lifting something else in its place. Me. As I walked out of the cafe into the chilled Manhattan air, I felt it, not triumph, not yet, but something more dangerous. Clarity, For 8 years. I built for someone else's empire. Now. I was building my own. 2 days after the cafe meeting, I walked into a private conference suite inside Altris Group's Midtown office. No branding on the walls, no security badges, just a retinal scanner, a voice-authenticated entry system, and a table full of silence. 6 people sat around that table, each a key strategist for Alteris's global expansion unit. At the head sat Liam Cortez, arms crossed, eyes locked on me like we were already mid-game. In front of each person was a draft dossier titled Proposal V2, Multilateral Defense Infrastructure, Realignment Strategy. Alteris didn't waste time, and neither did I. They had prepared the bones of the proposal within 24 hours. I had added the muscle. The document now included system schematics, deployment schedules, risk management matrices, and most importantly, contractual clauses aligned with the compliance models of all 4 nations. Liam gestured for me to begin. Everything Daxon pitched, we've replicated, I said, standing calmly at the whiteboard. What they neglected, we corrected. What they oversold, we trimmed. What they locked behind ambiguous terms, we made transparent. And we did all of it without dragging along their baggage. I paused, then turned toward the group. But there's one condition. No one interrupted. I let the silence stretch a little before delivering the blow. Under no circumstance can Vernon Blake be involved in this proposal. Not as a negotiator, not as a consultant, not even as a face in a press release. A few eyebrows rose. Liam simply nodded. You'll find that clause already embedded in Appendix C. Section 2, I added. It's clear, legally binding. If any of the governments request his presence, we retain the right to withdraw. This wasn't pettiness. It was tactical insulation. Vernon Blake had become a liability, not just to Daxon, but to any deal that bore his name. His face on a PDF might as well be a red stamp reading destabilizing force. A woman to my left, Marina Cho, a former trade attaché, now managing Alteris's APAC diplomacy, spoke first. What's the justification for that clause? Governments won't take this lightly. They'll ask why we're gatekeeping a former executive. I met her gaze. We don't need to explain. They'll know. Some already do. That wasn't bravado. That was data. The Germans were watching. The Japanese were holding back signatures. And the UAE, well, they just made themselves crystal clear. Exactly 43 minutes after the final draft was uploaded to the encrypted transmission portal, we received a message from Ambassador Hala Nasser, head of UAE's Strategic Procurement Office. The subject line read, Alternate technical proposal received. Her reply was curt. Surgical. We appreciate the transparency and clarity in the revised infrastructure proposal. We have not proceeded further with Daxon due to internal inconsistencies regarding delegation authority. Please note, if those issues remain unresolved, our government is prepared to terminate pending agreements and consider qualified alternatives, including yours. Everyone at the table turned toward me. No one smiled. We weren't celebrating, we were positioning. This, Liam said slowly, tapping the screen, is the first real crack. I nodded. More will follow. Because this wasn't just a better offer. It was a lifeboat for 4 governments starting to realize they'd boarded the wrong ship, and I was the one tossing them the rope. What Vernon failed to understand was that power in global negotiations doesn't come from charm or headlines. It comes from credibility, from consistency, from the ability to deliver what's been promised, on time, under scrutiny, and with integrity. And no one trusted him to do that anymore. Before we adjourned, Liam looked up from his notes. You sure you're ready for this next step, Eliza? I was ready the moment he hit send on that termination email, I said, my voice flat but steady. This isn't retaliation, this is replacement. He gave a single nod. Good, because the next 72 hours are going to change everything. I closed the folder in front of me, the final draft now locked and time-stamped. Vernon thought he'd silenced me, but the truth was, I had just rewritten the script and cast him out of the story entirely. The cracks didn't start with a bang. They came in murmurs. It began with a single headline buried halfway down the financial newsfeed on a Wednesday morning. Daxon Aerodyne's $3 billion global defense contract may face unexpected delays. It wasn't accusatory, yet. The article quoted anonymous insiders and regulatory hurdles, but made no direct claims. It was cautious, tentative, the kind of piece investors skim past until the next morning. When a second article ran, this time front and center on a prominent tech investment blog, multiple government partners quietly freeze timetables as Daxon misses key activation benchmarks. That got attention, and fast. By 10 o'clock a.m., analysts were already drafting talking points. By 11:30, two major shareholder groups submitted formal inquiries to the board. By lunch, a CNBC anchor closed a segment with, "If these reports are accurate, the real story isn't about software, it's about leadership." And Vernon Blake? He smiled his way through it. He made his usual press rounds, throwing out words like optimization, international coordination, and expected onboarding adjustments. On screen, he looked polished, calm, reassuring, but I knew him too well, and behind the scenes, he was already sweating. Daxon's internal channels were buzzing, and a former colleague, Rebecca Singh, who used to serve as a contracts liaison under me, reached out via Signal. They're scrambling. Eliza! No one knows why the activations stalled. Vernon's blaming middle managers. Legal's throwing shade at ops. But everyone's too afraid to say your name. Any word on the biometrics? I asked. They're realizing too late. Japan just flagged the clause this morning. Compliance won't proceed without your sign-off. That clause you fought for? It's now their noose. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the message. Japan had been the most methodical of the four. Conservative in action, deliberate in policy. If they were pausing, it was only a matter of time before the others followed. Sure enough, by 3 o'clock p.m., a formal statement was released from Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Due to unresolved authentication protocols as stipulated in Sections 3.1 and 4.6 of the binding agreement, all implementation activities concerning Daxon Aerodyne's proposed infrastructure will be temporarily suspended until biometric verification from the designated representative is completed. My name wasn't in the statement, but it didn't need to be. Every insider, every analyst, every government liaison knew who the designated representative was. Me. That evening, Vernon called an all-hands executive meeting. I wasn't in the room, but thanks to Rebecca and two others who hadn't yet deleted my number, I got a clear picture of what went down. He started with his usual corporate optimism. We've hit a few compliance speed bumps, but nothing unmanageable. But when someone asked why the biometric clearances hadn't been addressed before the press launch, the room went cold. One junior VP, Aidan Wolf, had the nerve to ask, "Did we clear Eliza's authorization before finalizing timelines?" And Vernon, flushed, tight-jawed, responded, "She's no longer with the company. That process is being restructured." "Then who's replacing her on the compliance chain?" Aidan pressed. No answer. You could hear a pen drop through the call. The truth was finally sinking in, not just for Vernon, but for the institution around him. You don't cut out the cornerstone and expect the cathedral to stand. Meanwhile, the stock started to move. Not a crash, yet, but a drip. 0.8% down on day one, 1.3% on day two. By the end of the week, Daxon had lost nearly $400 million in value. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to signal unease. enough to stir hedge funds into watching closely, enough for government stakeholders to rethink timelines and risk, and most dangerously of all, enough for whispers to begin inside the boardroom. From my end. I remained quiet, still, but not idle. Altris and I scheduled the next round of diplomatic briefings. I reviewed public filings, cross-checked Daxon's latest PR statements with internal legal clauses, and built a detailed map of every claim Vernon had made that could unravel under scrutiny. I didn't need to shout. I didn't even need to push. He was unraveling himself. One headline, one clause, one silence at a time. The doors to the 12th floor boardroom slammed shut at 8:43 a.m., nearly shattering the silence of the entire executive wing. Vernon Blake stood at the front of the glass-walled room, fists planted on the mahogany table, lips pressed into a line so tight it seemed bloodless. "This is a containment meeting," he said without preamble. "No leaks, no recordings, no outside comms. You all know why you're here." Around the table sat 10 of Daxon Aerodyne's top executives, legal counsel, compliance directors, and a visibly rattled VP of global strategy named Elliot Sloan, who kept rubbing his temples like he hadn't slept in days. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and panic. Vernon continued, pacing now. "Japan's pullback was a shock. Germany's silence is worse. We've lost control of the narrative. I want immediate solutions. I want activation. I want options." Janelle Frakes, head of international legal operations, cleared her throat. "We've combed through the language in all 4 contracts. The biometric requirement is airtight, specific to the named technical representative." She didn't say the name out loud. She didn't need to. "Eliza," Vernon hissed. "There has to be a workaround." "There isn't," Janelle replied. "Not without breaching terms in 3 of the 4 jurisdictions. Germany and Japan require the original signee. UAE and Brazil might entertain a redelegation, but only if formally processed through the original channel, which no longer exists." Vernon's jaw clenched. "So we're paralyzed." "Legally," Janelle said, folding her hands. "Yes." A long silence followed. Then, from the far corner, Casey Lim, one of Vernon's executive assistants, shifted in her seat. I feel like I should mention something," she said cautiously. "Back in April, during a risk review meeting, Eliza flagged this clause as a potential single-point vulnerability. She advised we set up an alternate credential structure, but the suggestion was deprioritized." Vernon turned sharply. "By who?" Casey hesitated. "You said it would overcomplicate PR rollout. You wanted clean faces in the press." No one moved. You could practically hear the oxygen leave the room. "I don't recall that," Vernon muttered. Elliot Sloan spoke up, voice tense. "There's an email thread. I was CC'd. It's archived." Janelle looked up from her notes, brow furrowing. "We need to pull that thread immediately. If that email surfaces outside this room." She didn't finish the sentence, because it already had. In another part of the building, several floors below, Thomas Gray, an IT security analyst, had flagged an unusual pattern of internal traffic overnight, a spike in downloads from Daxon's internal archive system, including high-priority executive correspondence. At 7:21 a.m., a redacted portion of an internal email began circulating in an encrypted Discord channel popular with defense sector analysts, and by 8:05 a.m., it had hit the inbox of a journalist at Defense Weekly. The subject line? Remove Grant. Need one face for the win. The body, partially censored, revealed Vernon's own words. "Let's streamline this. She's useful, but if we want a single leadership narrative, she's in the way. Final decision. She's out before the public rollout. We need the win on my side of the table." Within 30 minutes, screenshots were being tweeted under the hashtag #DaxonDisaster. Back in the boardroom, Vernon was on the verge of eruption. "Find me a counter-narrative, now!" he barked. "Leak a story, anything. Make it look like she resigned. Family emergency, ethics dispute. I don't care. Just shift the narrative before this snowballs." But it was too late. The snowball had already reached the cliff. Across the city, I sat at a quiet cafe, watching the headlines populate in real time. Daxon internal emails leak? CEO removed lead architect for spotlight? Former executive holds biometric keys to $3 billion deal. Was she pushed out? Vernon Blake silent as stock continues to dip. I didn't grin. I didn't cheer. I simply stirred my coffee, because when you've spent your entire career being overlooked, underestimated, and erased, there's a special kind of peace in watching the truth do what you never needed to say aloud. It happened at 9:15 a.m., Brasilia time, with no leaks, no press release, no warning. The Brazilian Ministry of Defense sent a 2-sentence email to Daxon Aerodyne's executive office and all associated compliance liaisons. Due to unresolved inconsistencies in contractual authorization and failure to fulfill terms related to technical validation, the ministry has elected to formally withdraw from the pending defense partnership with Daxon Aerodyne, effective immediately. No room for negotiation, no call for clarification, no invitation to fix it, just a clean, clinical execution of a $750 million slice of the deal. Vernon didn't even see the message first. Marissa Delaney, the VP of South American Relations, did. She tried to reach him twice, then finally stormed into the war room on the 12th floor, breathless, and dropped her phone face up on the table. "Brazil's out!" The room went still. Someone knocked over a half-full cup of coffee. No one noticed. Vernon read the email once, then twice, before slowly setting the phone down, as if afraid of shattering the screen, or maybe the illusion that this could still be salvaged. By 10:42 a.m., Altara sent a formal letter of intent to all 4 nations, using encrypted diplomatic channels. The proposal was simple, bold, and written with a tone of decisive opportunity. We acknowledge the structural gaps left by Daxon Aerodyne's current leadership. In light of those limitations, Altaris Group formally expresses interest in fulfilling all 4 defense contracts, with updated deployment systems built by Eliza Grant, the original architect trusted by your teams. Attached was my full CV, a compliance roadmap, and my credentials across all 4 jurisdictions, each still valid, each still active. We didn't just step into the ring, we dropped the gloves. Markets reacted like they always do to uncertainty, with panic dressed as strategy. By 1:00 p.m., Daxon stock had already dropped 11%. By close of trading, it had cratered to a total 19% loss, wiping nearly $1.1 billion from the company's market cap in a single day. That wasn't a dip. That was a seismic event. Major funds began unloading. Social media erupted. Screenshots of leaked internal Slack messages, jittery, incomplete conversations from inside the executive suite, surfaced on Twitter and Discord. "We're hemorrhaging." What the hell is Blake doing? Was Eliza really the linchpin? By 5:15 p.m., the board of directors summoned Vernon for an emergency session scheduled that same evening. No assistants, no PR team, just him, and 10 seats filled with cold eyes and angrier investors. But none of it compared to the final blow. At 6:27 p.m., an article went live on Global Tech Insider. Not just a think piece, a timeline, sourced anonymously, but with receipts. Subject line: Fired after success. The Eliza Grant timeline. Daxon hoped you'd never see. It included documents from 4 internal systems, her onboarding as technical representative, her negotiation logs across the 4 countries, the time-stamped final meeting notes logged in Daxon's own CRM at 3:05 p.m. on the day she secured the Brazil agreement, and the termination email sent at 5:05 p.m. that same day, exactly 2 hours later. The article asked the question aloud that everyone else had been whispering for days. Why was the lead technical strategist removed only 2 hours after finalizing a $3 billion international contract? And the public, hungry for blood, answered. I watched the board session unfold through private updates sent by a familiar source, Natalie Wong, one of the more level-headed members of Daxon's compliance board. She had always respected the work, even if she kept her distance from the politics. "They're not buying his explanations anymore," she texted. "He said it was a restructuring. They asked for proof it was discussed prior to signing." He stammered, then deflected, then blamed internal miscommunication. Someone asked if his email was a PR stunt. His face turned white. That night, Vernon left the building without speaking to reporters. No interviews, no statements, just a black sedan idling curbside and a man whose empire had cracked beneath the weight of one name he thought he could erase. I closed my laptop slowly, letting the silence of the apartment fill the space between breaths. He fired me for a headline. Now. The headlines were writing his obituary. There are few sounds more satisfying than silence after chaos. By the time 8:00 a.m. rolled around the next morning, the building that once bore Vernon Blake's name in hushed reverence now echoed with muted confusion. Executives avoided eye contact. Assistants whispered in doorways. The Daxon Aerodyne lobby, once a symphony of curated greetings and high heels on polished tile, felt like a funeral home. The news broke before breakfast. Vernon Blake resigns from Daxon effective, immediately amid contract fallout. No farewell speech, no photo op, no internal thank you memo, just a one-line statement posted to the investor portal. Due to internal governance reviews and shifts in organizational strategy, Mr. Blake has stepped down from his position as Chief Executive Officer. The press speculated about mutual decisions, but I knew better. The truth came straight from Natalie Wong, who'd remained my quiet ally from the board. "The vote was unanimous," she texted. 10-0. He tried to delay it. Then he threatened legal action. But then someone brought up the clause in the executive charter. "The one you pushed for 2 years ago." I paused, rereading that. "Gross breach of fiduciary duty. No exit benefits shall be awarded if leadership actions demonstrably damage international standing or shareholder value." Back then, I had insisted that clause be added when reviewing legacy executive contracts. Everyone rolled their eyes. Vernon even joked. Only the paranoid write their own firing procedures. Funny how that worked out. By 10:15 a.m., the clause was invoked. The board voided his golden parachute, over $28 million in severance, bonuses, and equity. Gone. With one vote and a single line of policy he never cared to read. Poetic. Meanwhile, across the city, I stood at a glass table in the 44th floor executive suite of Altaris Group's headquarters. The contract in front of me bore the Altaris seal, but the wording, every clause, every protection, every risk-balanced deliverable was mine. This time, no one had rewritten me out. Position, Executive Vice President, Global Strategy and Compliance Term, Indefinite Authority, Autonomous Structure Approval within all international programs. Reporting, direct to CEO and Chair of the Strategic Innovation Board. No middle managers, no corporate layers designed to mute my influence. This wasn't a promotion, it was a coronation. Liam Cortez, standing across from me, extended a pen. "You sure about this?" I met his eyes without hesitation. I was sure the moment he erased me. The pen touched paper. Ink met line. The signature, this time, was permanent. Minutes later, I stepped into the new executive command room. 4 monitors lined the far wall, each showing real-time diplomatic activity from the four key nations. Each government had acknowledged the Altaris transition. Each had issued formal replies, requesting next-step coordination. On the fourth screen, Brazil's ambassador was smiling during a press conference. When asked about Altaris, he said, "We prefer working with people who build systems and don't try to take credit for them." Subtle, but I felt it. As I took my seat at the head of the table, a delivery person entered the office with a flat, rectangular box, wrapped in cream-colored paper and tied with black twine. There was no note. Inside the box was a framed photo, a printed copy of my Daxon termination email. Someone had taken the time to print it on embossed linen paper and mount it on soft matte backing. At the bottom, written in a neat gold-inked scrawl, were the words, "Every dismissal is a redirection." I didn't laugh. I didn't tear up. I simply placed it on the shelf behind my desk, dead center. Let it sit like a medal no one else could award me. Because there was something deeply satisfying in watching the empire that tried to erase me crumble under the weight of its own arrogance, especially when that fall created the perfect foundation for my own. From exile to architect, from silence to strategy, from scapegoat to sovereign, the wall hadn't just cracked, it fell. And I walked over it, without ever looking back. The light filtered through floor-to-ceiling glass panels, casting quiet reflections onto the polished stone floor of the Altaris Global Strategy Suite. The office was high above Manhattan, a corner room with an unbroken view of the skyline, a view Vernon Blake once boasted about, though he never earned it. Now it was mine, and this time, my name wasn't on a temporary placard. It was etched in brushed steel beneath the company crest. Eliza J. Grant, Executive Vice President, Global Strategy and Compliance. I set my coffee down and took a slow breath, letting it all settle around me, not the furniture or the decor, but the presence, the stillness, the quiet that only comes when the fight is over and you've won, not with noise, not with fury, but with endurance. On the wall across from my desk, 4 flags hung in elegant symmetry: Japan, Germany, the United Arab Emirates, and Brazil. They weren't just symbols of nations, they were chapters, each one a country I had walked into with the weight of $1 billion negotiation on my back and left with signed trust in hand. They represented the kind of loyalty you can't fake, buy, or PR spin your way into. You earn it. Clause by clause, line by line, face to face, and you protect it, even when your name is quietly deleted from the systems you helped build. Behind me, on a small black walnut shelf that had just been installed that morning, sat only one item, a picture frame, matte black, with museum-quality glass. Inside it, mounted on textured ivory linen paper, was an email. Subject: Termination of employment. From Vernon Blake time. Sent 5:05 p.m. Thursday. Message: Effective immediately. Your services are no longer required. We appreciate your contribution. That was it. No signature, no thanks, no recognition. It used to sting. Now, it was the only artifact from my past life I allowed into this new chapter, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of the moment everything changed, the moment someone tried to erase me and instead sharpened me into something unshakable. The rest of the office was still being finalized. A design team had pitched me sleek modern finishes and corporate minimalism. I asked for something else. Warmth, weight, meaning. Every object had to speak, not of power, but of presence. A carved wood sculpture from a German craftsman, gifted after the first joint agreement. A ceramic dish from a market in Osaka, given by the interpreter who translated every clause with reverence. A set of pens from a UAE defense analyst, handed to me quietly with the words, "You are the one who makes it real." These weren't trophies. They were testaments. Outside, I could hear the low murmur of conversations beginning. The strategic board would meet in 20 minutes. The agenda was simple: transitioning all 4 contracts under the Altaris banner with a new directive, one built on accountability, transparency, and above all, leadership that couldn't be bought or replaced at will. This time, there would be no ghost signatures, no forgotten architects, no erasures, because I was no longer behind the scenes. I was the scene, and as I leaned back in my chair, the frame caught a sliver of sunlight. For a moment, the words on that cold, abrupt email seemed to shimmer. I didn't look away. I didn't need to anymore. They thought I was the one delivering documents, but I was the one who wrote the rules. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've felt what I felt, working in the shadows while someone else stood in the spotlight, being thanked with silence, replaced without notice, discarded after devotion. Let this be your reminder. Your worth isn't determined by your title. It's defined by your impact. And sometimes the only justice that matters is the quiet, relentless kind, the kind that rebuilds what others tried to break. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Have you ever been underestimated, erased, or forced to start over? Let's talk about it. You're not alone. Leave a comment. Like this story if it hit home. Share it with someone who needs to know they still hold the pen. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of power, perseverance, and poetic justice.